19 years. That's how long a father kept a single room untouched, dust-covered, curtains drawn, toys frozen in time, waiting for a daughter who vanished without a trace. It was the summer of 1994, when a small-town family was torn apart by the unthinkable. One moment, she was playing on the porch. The next, gone. No goodbye. No clue. Just silence. And in that silence, a father carried a grief that aged him more than the years ever could. He never moved away. Never changed his number. Every birthday, he still baked her favorite cake, chocolate with strawberry frosting, just in case. What no one knew was that she had left behind something locked away, almost forgotten. A puzzle box, handcrafted, intricate, and sealed since the day she disappeared. He couldn't bring himself to touch it. Not until now. On what would have been her 32nd birthday, he sat alone in her room and, trembling, reached for it. The moment he turned the box, it made a sound he hadn't heard in decades. A soft click, like a whisper from the past. Inside, he expected perhaps an old note, a toy, maybe even a trinket. But what he found shattered everything he believed about her vanishing. The box didn't just hold an object. It held a memory, a moment captured in ink and sealed away from the world. A photograph, and on the back, 4 words scribbled in her handwriting. "Dad, I had to." That sentence opened wounds he thought had already bled dry. But it also opened a new door, one he never knew existed. It wasn't just about finding her. It was about understanding why she left. And the truth was more heartbreaking, more unbelievable than anything he could have imagined. As he traced the edges of the note with trembling fingers, his mind began to replay every moment leading up to that day. The odd phone calls, the man she once pointed to from across the street, the teacher who suddenly transferred schools. Suddenly, the pieces that never fit started to align. And what was buried beneath nearly 2 decades of silence began to rise to the surface. He realized he hadn't lost her by accident. She had been protecting him, hiding something, maybe even someone. Tonight, you will walk with his father. Through memories, through pain, through secrets kept far too long. Because what lies beyond this puzzle box is not just a mystery. It's a story of sacrifice, courage, and a love that refused to die, even in the face of disappearance. The day before she vanished was strangely normal. At least, that's what everyone kept telling themselves. Emily was only 13, a quiet girl with a curious mind and a love for puzzles. Her room was a reflection of her spirit. Books stacked in corners, notebooks filled with doodles and codes, and that wooden puzzle box sitting silently on her shelf. No one in the family knew where she got it. Her father assumed it was just another thrift shop trinket she brought home. But Emily treated that box like it held the world. She never let anyone touch it, not even him. She had spent that afternoon playing with her younger brother in the yard. Their mother was in the kitchen, her father repairing a broken gate. Everything was in place. Then came the scream. Faint, distant. By the time they rushed outside, Emily was gone. No tire tracks, no signs of struggle, just the sound of the wind and her little brother crying because she had simply vanished. Police searched. Dogs were brought in. Flyers were posted on every pole for miles. Days turned into weeks, weeks into years, and yet nothing. What haunted her father most wasn't the disappearance. It was the silence that followed. Emily had been a thoughtful child. If she had planned to leave, she would have said something, wouldn't she? The question became his obsession. He replayed every conversation, every moment, hoping to find some hidden message he might have missed. But the only tangible link to her puzzle box, remained locked, unopened, sitting like a sealed tomb on her dresser. He tried once, a year after she disappeared, to open it. But the mechanism was complicated. Every attempt felt like an invasion, like forcing open something sacred. And so he left it alone, convinced that if she ever came back, she'd open it herself. It became a ritual, dusting it off gently, placing it back in its spot, hoping. But as the years rolled on, hope began to rust. Until the day that letter arrived. No return address. Just a simple envelope marked with his name and her handwriting. Inside was a blank sheet, except for one thing. A number. 42. He stared at it for hours. It meant nothing. Or at least, not yet. But something inside him shifted. That night, he walked in her room for the first time in years, sat on the floor beside the puzzle box, and began to examine it like she once did. Slowly, carefully, not as a grieving father, but as someone following breadcrumbs. Because maybe, just maybe, Emily had left a trail. He spent the entire night with the puzzle box in his lap, fingers tracing the carvings she had once studied with such fascination. It wasn't just decorative. Each symbol, each notch, had purpose. He began to remember how Emily loved riddles that had layers, puzzles within puzzles. The number 42 echoed in his mind like a haunting melody. Then it struck him. Emily's bookshelf had exactly 42 books when she disappeared. He remembered because he bought her the last one as a birthday gift. With trembling hands, he returned to the bookshelf, long untouched, and began counting. When he reached the 42nd book, The Secret Garden, a folded note slipped out from between its pages. A single word was written on it: turn. The message was maddeningly vague, yet his heart pounded with clarity. He went back to the box. He turned it once. Nothing. Twice. Still nothing. But on the third rotation, something inside shifted. A tiny click. Then a panel slid open. Inside was not what he expected. A photograph. It was of a man he didn't recognize. Gray-haired, with a beard and a piercing stare. On the back of the photograph, again in Emily's writing, "He watched me." His heart nearly stopped. Who was this man? A neighbor? A stranger? Someone the police had overlooked? The man's face was unfamiliar, but there was a familiarity to the place behind him in the picture. A bench, a tree, a playground. It was the one across from their house. Memories flooded him. How many times had he walked past that bench? How often had Emily played there while he stood at the window, sipping his coffee? Had someone been watching her all along? The thought was unbearable. He took the photo and drove to the playground the next morning. The bench was still there, aged and cracked. As he sat down, he noticed something carved into the wood. Letters, small and faded, but there. E+D+M. Emily. Dad. Mom. Then, just beneath that, something even stranger, a series of numbers. 12, 5, 19, 18. It wasn't a date. It looked like a code. Emily's code. He had seen her play with letter number substitutions before. A simple A=1, B=2 cipher. When he decoded it, the message was chilling. LESR. He wasn't sure what it meant yet, but he knew one thing. Emily had left him clues, and they were just beginning to surface. He returned home with the photograph and the coded message, feeling a strange mix of dread and hope. He couldn't shake the sense that everything he believed about her disappearance was unraveling. That maybe she hadn't been taken, but had run, hidden, planned. Still, why? And from whom? The initials LESR gnawed at him. He laid out all the pieces on Emily's bed. The photo, the note from the book, the puzzle box, and the envelope. One thing was clear. Emily had wanted to be found, but only by him, and only when he was ready. He searched the old photo again. This time, he noticed a small detail in the background, a rusty metal plaque on the playground gate. Zooming in revealed barely visible text, donated by LESR Foundation. His breath caught. LESR wasn't a message. It was an organization, one he'd never heard of. That night, he searched for it online. Nothing official came up. But on a forgotten web forum from the early 2000s, buried deep in a thread about missing persons, someone had asked a chilling question. Anyone heard of LESR? I think they follow kids. He felt physically ill. He kept digging. Another user had mentioned a learning and enrichment social retreat, a now-defunct private institution that ran programs for gifted children in the late 80s and early 90s. It closed in 1996, 2 years after Emily vanished. The timing wasn't lost on him. The more he searched, the more he found rumors about secrecy, disappearances, family silenced. His hands trembled as he scrolled through the names of supposed students. None were listed officially, but someone had uploaded a blurry image of a class photo. In the back row, barely visible, a girl who looked like Emily. He saved the image and enlarged it. It was grainy, but there was no mistaking her eyes. Her hair. Her posture. It was her. Older than 13, maybe 15. How was that possible? If she had vanished at 13, how could she appear in a photo taken years later? Unless she had never truly been missing. Maybe she had been hidden. Or worse, hidden away. He sat in the dark, heart pounding, staring at her face on the screen. She looked scared. Her smile was tight. Forced, like someone told her to smile, or else. And then he saw it. In the corner of the photo, just behind a group of students, stood a man. The same gray beard, same cold eyes. The man from the photograph in the puzzle box. There was no doubt now. Emily had been trying to tell him something all along. This wasn't just a disappearance. It was part of something deeper, something darker, and he had no choice but to follow the trail, no matter where it led. The next morning, he drove to the town where the retreat had once operated. It was a small, wooded area nearly 2 hours away, tucked behind a faded road sign that simply read Cedar Lake. The facility was long abandoned, its buildings crumbling under years of neglect. Vines grew over the entrance. Windows were shattered. But the moment he stepped inside, he felt her presence. The hallways smelled of damp wood and decay, but somewhere beneath the rot lingered a faint scent of lavender. Emily's favorite. Room after room revealed nothing but dust and forgotten furniture. Until he reached the library. Bookshelves still stood, half empty. Papers littered the floor. He noticed a door behind a curtain, barely visible, like it wasn't meant to be found. When he pulled it open, a narrow staircase led downward into a basement. His flashlight flickered. Each step creaked beneath his weight. And then, at the base of the stairs, a metal door. Locked, but on it, scratched into the surface, a single word. Run. He didn't know if it was a warning or a message from Emily. He leaned in closer and saw something else. Initials etched beneath the word. E.W. Her full name. His heart raced. This was no coincidence. She had been here. She had lived here. And she had tried to escape. He backed away from the door, unsettled. Something was wrong. This wasn't just a retreat. It was something else entirely. He had no more, but not alone. So he returned to town and began asking questions. Most people pretended not to remember the place. Some looked uncomfortable. But one old man, a former janitor, agreed to talk. They sat at a diner. His voice was low, eyes darting to every corner of the room. That place wasn't for learning, he said. It was a testing ground. They took kids, said it was for enrichment. But those kids, they were scared. Always watched. Always being recorded. I don't know what they were doing. But it wasn't right. The janitor paused, then added, there was one girl who stood out. She was clever. Always writing things down, hiding notes. I think her name was Emily. The father froze. The man nodded. She tried to run. Twice. They caught her. Then one day, she was just gone. They said her parents took her back. But I never saw anyone come for her. His throat went dry. This changed everything. Emily hadn't been missing. She had been taken from them. And no one had ever told the truth. Back home, he couldn't sleep. The janitor's words echoed in his mind like ghosts banging at the door. She tried to run. Twice. What kind of place forces a child to attempt escape more than once? His daughter had been there, locked away, silenced, forced to smile in photographs while she cried inside. He stood again in her room, staring at the puzzle box now opened on her desk, a symbol of everything he never understood. But now he did. She was never lost. She was caged, and she had been trying to speak to him ever since. He returned to the box. Under the first compartment, now open, he discovered a second mechanism he hadn't noticed before. A smaller latch, cleverly hidden beneath a layer of wood, slid sideways with a faint click. A second chamber opened. Inside, a miniature key and a folded piece of red cloth. His breath caught when he recognized it. It was a piece of the dress Emily had been wearing the day she disappeared. Faded, fragile, but unmistakably hers. Beneath it, written in delicate ink, a phrase. Use the key where the light never touched. The words chilled him. Where the light never touched. It had to be the basement. The locked metal door. He'd been standing at the edge of it, too afraid to enter. But now he had the key. He returned to the abandoned facility before dawn, heart racing as he descended the same narrow staircase. When he reached the metal door, he slid the tiny key into the lock. It turned with a resistance that made his fingers ache, but it gave way. The door creaked open in a blackness, thick and heavy like oil. He stepped inside. The smell hit first. Mold, chemicals, something else metallic. Blood? He wasn't sure. The flashlight cut through the dark to reveal a long corridor, lined with doors, each marked with numbers. No names, just numbers. He pushed one open. Inside was a cot, a desk, and a single wall covered in scribbles. Messages, symbols, diagrams, childlike handwriting, frenzied and desperate. Then he saw it. Her name, Emily Wren, scratched into the wall repeatedly. Over and over again. He fell to his knees. Tears blurred his vision. His little girl had been here, had slept in this cold, soulless room, had etched her own name into the walls so she wouldn't forget who she was, so that someone might one day find her. She had left a map of her pain, a monument to her will to survive. And somewhere down this corridor, he knew there was more, maybe even the truth he wasn't yet ready to face. But he would go further. He had to, because this wasn't just about finding her anymore. It was about understanding why she was taken in the first place. He moved from room to room, each more unsettling than the last. Some were empty. Others had belongings, scraps of journals, drawings, forgotten toys. In one, a music box played a broken lullaby when touched. In another, he found a list of rules scrawled in crayon on the wall. No talking after lights out. No crying. Always smile for the man. That phrase, always smile for the man, made his stomach twist. It wasn't a school. It wasn't a retreat. It was a prison. And someone had made those children pretend it wasn't. In the last room at the end of the hall, he found what he never expected: evidence. A thick binder on a desk, labeled observation logs. He opened it and read page after page of notes, detailing the behavior of each child. The language was clinical, cold, detached. But the names were real. He saw Emily's name multiple times. Subject exhibits advanced reasoning, resistant to conditioning, attempts to manipulate environment, requires increased observation. The words filled him with rage. She wasn't a subject. She was his daughter. Then something else caught his eye. A separate folder, tucked beneath the logs, marked terminated. He hesitated before opening it, fearing the worst. But inside were only a few pages. And Emily's name wasn't there. Relief flooded him, followed by a realization. They had let her go. Or maybe she escaped. But if she had escaped, where had she gone? Why hadn't she come home? He flipped through the rest of the logs and found something unexpected. A mention of a town, Marrow Creek. A note beside it. Subject W last seen boarding bus toward Marrow Creek. Likely destination, unknown. Marrow Creek. It was nearly 3 states away. He never heard of it before. But the entry was dated 2 years after her disappearance. She had made it out. She'd survived. Somehow, Emily had run, again, and this time she got away. His hands trembled as he stared at the name of the town. It was a thread. The next step. The map she had left him was no longer just metaphorical. It was real. If she had made it there, someone had seen her. Someone knew. And he was going to find out. Marrow Creek was a ghost of town, tucked away between mountains and trees so dense they seemed to swallow the light. The kind of place you wouldn't find on most maps, and maybe that was the point. He drove for over 10 hours, the silence in the car louder than any words. All he had was a name, Emily, and a fading hope that someone here had seen her. As he entered the town limits, the atmosphere changed. Not just because it was quiet, but because it felt watchful, like the town itself was holding a secret it wasn't ready to share. He began at the local library, showing the photograph of Emily, the one from the school, not the one from before she vanished. It was a long shot, but he had to try. The librarian was kind, elderly, her face soft with time. She looked at the photo for a long while, then nodded slowly. She used to sit right there, she whispered, pointing to a dusty corner by the window. Always reading, always alone. I think she went by the name Eliza here. He felt a jolt in his chest. Eliza, close enough to Emily to feel familiar, but changed enough to stay hidden. He asked if she knew where Eliza had gone. The librarian shook her head. She stopped coming one day, about 10, maybe 11 years ago. But I remember she left behind a book. Said it was her favorite. Told me to give it to someone who needed to remember. The librarian disappeared into the back and returned with a worn copy of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Inside the cover, in delicate handwriting, was a message. If he's reading this, I made it. I'm safe, but I can't come back yet. His hands shook as he read the words over and over. She was alive, or at least, she had been. She had made it out of that place and found refuge here, even if just for a while. But why couldn't she return? What was still keeping her away after all these years? He felt a fresh wave of grief mixed with pride. She had survived horrors no child should face. She had escaped. She had warned him. And now, she was leaving behind breadcrumbs once more. He turned the book upside down, examining every page. On the very last one, she had drawn a small sketch, a cottage beside a river, a tall oak tree behind it. No words, just that simple image. A place she had been, a place she was still hiding? Or was it just symbolic? Her version of home? Whatever it was, he knew it mattered. And he would search every corner of Marrow Creek to find that tree, that river, and maybe his daughter. The sketch became his compass. Every day, he wandered the winding roads and muddy paths of Marrow Creek, showing the image to locals and business owners. Most shook their heads. Some offered directions that led to dead ends. But on the fourth day, an old man at a bait shop looked at the drawing and said, "That tree. I've seen it. Out near the North Fork. Used to be a cottage there, long time ago. Place is empty now, I think." The man gave him directions, half expecting him to give up. But he didn't. He followed the river. The path was rough, half-eaten by the forest. Nature had reclaimed most of it, but eventually he saw it. The oak tree, towering, wide, with a scar down its bark like a lightning strike had once split it open. Behind it, nearly buried in ivy and wildflowers, stood a cottage. Time had worn it down, shutters barely hanging, roof missing tiles, but it was unmistakably the same one from Emily's sketch. He stepped inside slowly, heart pounding like a drum. Dust clung to the air. The walls were covered in old newspaper clippings and children's drawings. A mattress in the corner, books stacked neatly, a kettle on the stove, long rusted over. Whoever had lived here was long gone, but not carelessly. It looked like someone had packed and left with intention. He walked over to the small writing desk in the corner and opened a drawer. Inside, he found more notes, written in Emily's distinct, tight cursive. "Don't trust anyone from Eleazar." Another read, "They're still looking. Stay invisible." Each note was a scream from the past, and each one made it clear Emily hadn't run away from him. She had run for her life. One note stood out among the rest. It wasn't written like the others. It was folded, addressed to Dad. With shaking hands, he unfolded it. The first line read, "If you found this, you followed the puzzle, just like I knew you would." He couldn't breathe. He sank to the floor, reading every word like it was the last message on earth. She explained everything. How she'd been taken, how they trained the children, how she escaped during a winter storm and never looked back. She ended with a warning. "If you found this place, they might find you too. Be careful. But know this, I love you. I never stopped. I'm alive. And one day, if it's safe, I'll find you." The room spun. Tears blurred his vision. She was alive, and still running. He wasn't just chasing memories anymore. He was standing on the edge of something bigger, something still out there. And now, he wasn't just a father searching for answers. He was a witness, and perhaps the only one left who knew the truth. The ride back to his motel was quiet, but his mind raged like a storm. The letter was folded tightly in his jacket pocket, its words burned into his memory. "If you found this place, they might find you too." That warning echoed louder than anything else. Who were they now? Were they still watching? Still tracking the children who had escaped? The idea seemed impossible, yet everything in his gut told him it was real. Emily had lived in fear, not just for herself, but for him. She had stayed away to protect him. That realization cut deeper than any grief he had ever known. He knew he couldn't go to the police. Not yet. What could he even say? That he found a letter from a girl, missing for 19 years in a cottage hidden in the woods, written in code? That a mysterious organization, once parading as a school, had kept children like prisoners? No one would believe him. He needed proof. He needed names, records, something concrete that couldn't be denied. And suddenly, he remembered the binder, the one from the facility. He had taken photos of the documents. Maybe, just maybe, one of those files held a name he could trace. He opened his laptop and began reviewing each photo, magnifying the text. Many entries were abbreviated, cold, incomplete. But one page listed a faculty member, Dr. Howard Eames, a psychologist, former director of behavioral studies at the retreat. That was something. A real name. He searched online and was shocked to find the man still alive, living under a different title, professor emeritus at a private college upstate. His heart pounded. This man had answers. Maybe he was the one who trained Emily. Or maybe he was the one who took her. It took him 3 days to get an appointment. He posed as a writer researching early behavioral institutions. And, to his surprise, the professor agreed to meet. The man was older now, gray and frail, but still sharp-eyed. In the wood-paneled office, lined with books and certificates, the father sat across from him, barely able to keep his hands from shaking. "You worked with children," he said, trying to sound casual. "At Cedar Lake." The professor stiffened. "That was a long time ago," he replied. "I don't talk about those years." But he pressed further, showing the photo of Emily. Not the young, smiling girl, but the teenage version from the class image. The professor's eyes narrowed. "Where did you get this?" His voice turned cold. "She was never supposed to be found." That sentence was a crack of thunder. The truth was no longer hiding in shadows. It was sitting right in front of him. And now, everything would change. Because this man knew. He was part of it. And whatever secrets he still held could finally unravel the mystery that had swallowed Emily's life. The professor's face had turned pale, his lips tightening, as if he'd said too much. But the father leaned forward, refusing to back down. "She's my daughter. I know what happened to her. I found a place. I found her letters. I know about the experiments." The old man closed his eyes for a long moment, and when he opened them again, they were different. Tired. Haunted. "I warned them," he muttered. "Told them she was too smart for the program. Too self-aware. They didn't listen. And then she vanished." He didn't deny it. He didn't try to lie. Instead, he reached into a drawer and pulled out a single folder, unmarked, yellowing. "This is the only thing I kept. I shouldn't have. But I had to remember that we weren't just dealing with data points. They were children." Inside the folder were observation notes, sketches of neural response graphs, and an audio transcript, an interview with Emily. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Her voice, transcribed, was calm but guarded. She had known even then what they were doing. "You can train a bird to sing," she said in one line, "but it'll still fly if you leave the cage open." That single sentence left him breathless. It was Emily. Her voice. Her defiance. Her wisdom. She had resisted them, even under pressure. The professor leaned back, defeated. She was the only one who ever got out without being broken. That's why they still look for her. She's the loose end, the memory they couldn't erase. His jaw clenched. All these years, she wasn't just surviving. She was a threat to them. A living truth they hoped the world would forget. But she had outsmarted them. And now, her father would do the same. Before leaving, he asked one final question. "Are there more?" The professor nodded slowly. "Yes. Dozens. Maybe more. Some were taken in. Some vanished. Some, no one knows." That knowledge hit him like a wave. Emily wasn't the only child who suffered. She wasn't the only one still running. There were others. Families who had no idea what had truly happened. And, just maybe, there was still time to save them. But first, he had to find Emily. Truly find her. And he had a feeling she was already watching him from the shadows. Waiting. Deciding whether it was finally safe to come home. He drove away from the college with the folder clutched like a sacred relic. The professor's words echoing like thunder in his ears. "She's the loose end." That simple phrase confirmed what he feared most. Emily wasn't just missing. She was hunted. Not because she was a victim, but because she knew too much. And now that he'd uncovered these pieces, now that he had opened her world, he might be in danger too. Still, none of that mattered. What mattered was finding her, protecting her, and finally understanding the truth she had buried for nearly 2 decades. At the motel, he pored over the audio transcript again. Each word from Emily revealed something deeper, something coded between the lines. One sentence stood out. "When the birds stop singing, it's time to leave." It felt metaphorical, but with Emily, metaphors were maps. He began searching through the documents from the folder, matching dates and reports. On one particular date, marked with asterisks, several students had been relocated due to a compromised auditory condition. What did that mean? He ran searches for unusual noise events around that time. A local news site from 16 years ago reported an incident. A massive bird die-off near a transmission tower in a rural area just outside Marrow Creek. Dozens of dead starlings found overnight. No cause determined. But Emily had said the bird stopped singing, and then she left. It was her marker. That tower, whatever it was, meant something. It was her clock, her alarm, a sign to run. He knew what he had to do next. Go there. Even if it led him deeper into the rabbit hole she had carefully dug. When he arrived at the site, overgrown and fenced off, the air was unnaturally still. No wind, no birdsong. The tower still stood, rusted and humming faintly. As he approached, he noticed something odd. An outbuilding near the base, boarded shut. He circled it, looking for a way in. Behind a loose panel, he found a small, rusted door with numbers scratched faintly on it. In 94. Emily, 1994. He forced the door open. Dust exploded into the air, but inside was a small room filled with decaying equipment and a single filing cabinet. The drawers were jammed, but after forcing the lowest one open, he found something wrapped in plastic, several cassette tapes, and a notebook. The cover had a single word: witness. His breath caught. The tapes were labeled by dates, each one close to the years she was presumed dead. Had Emily recorded something here? Evidence. Testimony. He had no idea yet what he had found, but he knew this was hers. Her story. Her voice. And maybe, just maybe, a key to finally understanding everything. Back at the motel, he didn't sleep. The tapes sat in front of him like ticking time bombs. He borrowed an old tape recorder from a pawn shop, popped in the first cassette, and pressed play. Static crackled at first, and then her voice. Soft, nervous, older, but unmistakably Emily. She was alive, not just in memory, not just in his heart, but here. Her words filled the room like ghosts finally speaking after years of silence. If you're hearing this, you found the tower. That means you're close. Maybe it's you, Dad. Maybe it's someone I don't know. But this is my truth. I was taken in 94. They told me it was school. They lied. Her voice trembled, but didn't break. They didn't want students. They wanted obedience. They didn't teach us. They conditioned us. Made us repeat phrases. Sit for hours under lights. Rewarded us for compliance. Punished us for curiosity. He couldn't move. Could barely breathe. Every word was another needle through the years of pain and confusion. She continued. They tried to erase my name. Gave me numbers. But I never forgot who I was. I wrote it every day. On walls and books in my skin. I stayed me. That's how I won. That's why they wanted me gone. Her voice cracked then, but she steadied it. I escaped because of one girl. Her name was Mira. She distracted the guard. She didn't make it out. But I did. And I swore I'd never stop telling the truth. He paused the tape, overwhelmed. Emily had been through hell, but she hadn't broken. She had fought. She had recorded her story, not knowing if anyone would ever hear it. And now he had it, her raw testimony. There were still 4 more tapes. Still pages in the notebook he hadn't touched. But in that moment, all he could feel was something he hadn't known in years: connection. Through all her pain, all her silence, she had still been speaking. And now, he would listen to every single word. Because this wasn't just about his daughter anymore. It was about the truth. And truth, once found, demands to be heard. He opened the notebook next. The handwriting was unmistakable. Emily's sharp, methodical script. Every page was filled with detailed recollections. Names of the staff, room numbers, experiments, fragments of conversations. It was more than a diary. It was a log. She had documented everything with precision. One section was titled simply, Patterns. Beneath it, lists of routines, rotating schedules, and coded references to something called the adjustment. The word appeared again and again, circled in red. The way she described it chilled him. The adjustment is when they reset the ones who question. Lights, sounds, drugs. After that, they forget names. Forget faces. Forget themselves. I pretended once. They believed me. His breath caught. She had faked being broken just to survive. Every day she spent in that place was a performance, a careful lie, a strategy to stay alive long enough to escape. Emily wasn't just clever. She was resilient beyond anything he could have imagined. But what was his process? What had they done to the children who didn't escape? The more he read, the darker the story became. She spoke of a wing called D-Level, where kids were taken and never returned. One note read, "Don't follow the light in the floor. It leads to D-Level. No one comes back." He closed the book and stared at the wall. All this time, he had been mourning a lost child. But what had truly been stolen was her childhood, her freedom, her sense of safety. He pressed play on the second tape. This one was different. The voice was steadier, less afraid. Mira said something before I ran. She said, "If you ever get out, make it mean something. That's why I'm recording this. Because what happened to us wasn't an accident. It was part of something bigger. I think the people funding it are still out there. I think they're still watching. That's why I stayed hidden. I couldn't risk them finding you, Dad." Tears blurred his vision. She had sacrificed everything to keep him safe. The weight of her silence now felt heavier than any scream. But in her voice, there was something else, a strength, a fire that had refused to be extinguished. She didn't want to be found only to be rescued. She wanted the truth to mean something. And now, with the notebook, the tapes, the knowledge, he had everything she had left behind. But still, one question remained. Where is she now? Over the next few days, he pored over every inch of the materials Emily left behind. The third tape revealed the most detailed information yet. She described a network, a system that extended far beyond the Cedar Lake facility. There were others, she said. Other retreats, other names, same structure, same rules, same man with the gray beard. That image, the one from the puzzle box, came flooding back. That man wasn't just a staff member. He was something else. She referred to him as the architect. He was the one who smiled the least. Emily's voice whispered. He watched, but didn't speak much. When he did, the others listened. I think he designed the system. The punishments, the adjustments. They feared him, and so did we. She went on to say she'd heard rumors from the older kids, rumors that he'd been part of military experiments overseas. That Cedar Lake wasn't his first project, just the quietest one. One passage in the notebook included a detailed hand-drawn map, Emily's recreation of the compound layout, including a tunnel beneath the building labeled evac route. She had marked it with notes like guard rotation gaps, and used storage crawl space, and weak panel near boiler. Her escape hadn't been spontaneous. It had been engineered over months, possibly years. That map wasn't just history. It was proof. If he ever needed to show the world what had happened, this was his evidence. But another note stood out more than the rest. Tucked in the back of the notebook, barely legible, were coordinates. He checked them immediately. They pointed to a remote area in the mountains, miles from the nearest road. No towns, no signal, just forest. She had written, "If everything else fails, go here. But only if you're sure." That was all. No explanation. No context. But the tone felt final, like a last resort. A place of exile. Or safety. He stared at the numbers on the screen for a long time. If she was still alive and still running, this could be her final hiding place. The last page of the notebook had no writing, just a drawing. 2 birds flying free. Below them, a single word in bold letters, free. His heart clenched. Emily had never stopped trying to fly. And now, it was his turn to follow the wind she had left behind. He packed light, just the essentials. A flashlight, food, water, the notebook, and the tapes. He printed the coordinates and memorized them, even though he had no cell service where he was going. The drive into the mountains was long and unforgiving. Roads turned into trails, trails into dirt, and eventually into nothing. He left his car by a fallen tree and continued on foot. The silence of the forest was overwhelming. No traffic, no voices, no birds. Just the sound of his own breath and the soft crunch of earth beneath his boots. The further he walked, the more he felt like he was entering another world, one untouched by time. Trees grew impossibly tall. Moss covered the rocks like velvet. It was beautiful, yes, but also haunting. Every step forward brought the same question pounding in his chest. What if she's here? What if she's not? He followed the direction of the coordinates through dense underbrush until, after several hours, he saw it. A cabin, hidden behind a wall of trees, barely visible. It was small, simple, but intact. He approached slowly, hands trembling. There was no smoke, no sign of life, but something about the place felt occupied. The woodpile beside the door was stacked neatly. The porch swept clean. The window shutters were closed, but not broken. He knocked once. Silence. He knocked again. Then, from the inside, the faint creak of a floorboard. He froze. Someone was there. He stepped back. "Emily," he called, his voice barely more than a whisper. "It's Dad." No answer. But the door opened slowly. Just a crack. And then it shut again. Fast. A shadow passed behind the curtain. He didn't know what to do. He stood there, breath caught in his throat, heart racing. "I have the tapes," he said gently. "The notebook. I listened. I read everything. I know the truth now. And I'm not here to take you away. I'm here to say, I believe you." A pause. Then, slowly, the door opened again. She stood there. Older. Thinner. Wary. But her eyes were still Emily's. He felt everything at once. Relief, grief, pride, awe. She didn't speak. She just looked at him, as if trying to decide if he was real. He didn't move. Didn't rush to embrace her. He just stood there, tears running down his face, and whispered, "You don't have to hide anymore." She blinked, and for the first time in nearly 2 decades, her lips parted. "Not from you," she said. And with those 3 words, everything changed. Inside the cabin, the air was warm. A fire had been burning in the hearth, though it had dimmed. The space was modest, but meticulously kept. Blankets folded, books arranged. On the wall hung drawings, her drawings. Maps, birds, coded shapes. It wasn't just a hiding place. It was a sanctuary, built by hands that had once trembled in fear, but now moved with quiet purpose. Emily moved with caution, always watching the window, always listening. She hadn't forgotten the rules of survival, but there was something softer in her now. They sat at a small wooden table. No words for a long while. She stared at his face, reading it like a puzzle. Finally, she said, "You really listened to the tapes?" He nodded. "Everyone." Her eyes glistened, but she blinked the tears back. "I didn't think you'd ever find them." He took her hand gently. "You knew I would." And she had. Every breadcrumb she'd left, every coded message, deep down, she believed he would follow them. Over the next few hours, she told him what happened after she escaped. How she spent years living under different names, working in bookstores, hostels, safe houses. How she had been helped by others, people like Myra's brother, who had been searching too. A quiet underground of the forgotten. She didn't speak much about the worst parts. She didn't have to. He saw it in her eyes, in the way she paused between thoughts, in the way she sometimes flinched at sudden noises. The wounds hadn't fully healed, but she was alive, whole, herself. "I stayed away," she said, "because I thought they'd hurt you if I didn't. I thought if I led them to you." Her voice broke. "I couldn't risk it." He squeezed her hand. "You didn't lose me, Emily. You saved me. And now, it's you who needs saving from the silence, from the fear." She didn't answer, but she didn't let go. That was enough. In the cabin, under the weight of all those lost years, a small flame of something long buried began to return. Not just survival, not just endurance, but connection. That night, they sat by the fire. She showed him the final tape, one she hadn't hidden, but had never recorded over. The label said only, "Home." She pressed play. The static faded into a recording she'd made as a child, before everything. Her singing, off-key, joyful, a younger version of herself reciting a bedtime story. He closed his eyes and listened, and for the first time in 19 years, he didn't feel the weight of her absence. She was there. She had been there all along. And now, finally, so was he. The following days passed slowly, deliberately. Neither of them rushed anything. There was too much ground to cover. Years of silence, years of grief and guilt. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they didn't. Emily showed him where she stored her food, the safe trail she'd carved into the woods, the small metal box buried behind the cabin where she kept her most important things. Old photos, letters she never sent, pieces of herself she was too afraid to share until now. She had lived like this for over a decade, off-grid, under the radar, waiting for the world to forget her name. But even in isolation, she had kept notes, tracked possible sightings of the man she called the architect. She believed he was still out there, still working behind another mask, another name. "They don't stop," she said one morning, watching the treetops sway. "They just evolve. The program might be gone, but the people, they're like shadows. You see them only when it's too late." One of the most painful moments came when he showed her the binder from the old professor. He hadn't planned to, afraid it would re-traumatize her, but she insisted. She read every line with terrifying calm, nodding slowly, pointing to phrases that meant more than he realized. "This was written after the first time I tried to escape," she whispered. "They were planning to wipe me. Start over. But I begged the nurse. I told her my name. Over and over. She slipped me a pill that wasn't real. That's the only reason I remember anything at all." Her stories were like glass. Beautiful, sharp, and dangerously fragile. Everyone cut something inside him. She described the rituals, the sensory deprivation rooms, the children who lost themselves in silence. Some had been her friends. Some had just been faces she memorized in case she ever had to name them. She hadn't forgotten any of them. Their names lived in her notebook. "They should be remembered," she said, "even if I'm the only one who remembers." Then, one evening, she did something unexpected. She handed him a folded page, an old envelope sealed with wax. "It's everything else," she said quietly. "The names, the funding, the real locations. I gathered it all before I ran. I never showed anyone. But maybe you'll know what to do." He held it in his hands like it was burning. Inside that envelope, he knew, was the power to expose everything, but also the danger that came with it. She trusted him with the truth. And now, the question wasn't if he would act, but how. That night, sleep didn't come. He sat near the fire, the envelope in his lap, listening to the rhythm of the forest. Emily had gone to bed early, emotionally drained. But he remained awake, weighing the cost of the choice before him. Opening the envelope would mean making her story public. It would invite attention, possibly from people who didn't want this truth to resurface. But doing nothing felt like betrayal. She hadn't survived this long, just for her pain to remain buried in a cabin in the woods. Eventually, he broke the seal. Inside were documents, all handwritten, pages of names, donors, administrators, subsidiaries, symbols matching those in her tapes. He recognized some: a tech foundation in Seattle, a behavioral lab in Prague, an educational reform group now operating under a new name. There were dates, account numbers, even photographs. Emily had done more than escape. She had investigated. While hiding, she had built a case. A silent, private war she fought with a pen instead of a weapon. And at the bottom of the pile was one final photo. A surveillance image, blurry, but clear enough. A man walking out of a government building in Washington, D.C., gray beard, cold eyes. The architect. He wasn't in hiding. He was thriving. A speaker at conferences. A director of child development initiatives. He had transformed, rebranded, cloaked himself in new language and cleaner suits. But Emily had seen through it all. She had followed the thread back to its root. He placed the photo on the table and stared at it until sunrise. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every child who had gone through that system. Every parent who still thought their son or daughter had simply run away. And while Emily might never want to stand in the spotlight, maybe he could. Maybe he could be the voice she had been forced to bury. The one who took her evidence and made it impossible to ignore. In the morning, he told her. She listened quietly, hands folded, expression unreadable. When he finished, she said nothing for a long time. Then she walked to her desk, pulled out a small Polaroid from under the drawer, and handed it to him. "If it comes to that," she said, "use this. It's the only photo they never wanted anyone to see." It was her, 13 years old, seated in a sterile room, eyes defiant, wires taped to her temples. A single tear on her cheek. It was haunting. It was truth. And it was undeniable. That photo would change everything. But only if the world was finally ready to see it. He tucked the photo into a folder lined with copies of the documents Emily had preserved. Every item felt sacred now. A paper trail of pain, yes, but also of bravery, resilience, and unwavering clarity. Emily had gathered it all without knowing if anyone would ever find it. But now someone had. Her father. And that changed everything. As they packed the rest of her materials into a waterproof duffel, she spoke softly. "They'll come for it, if they know." He nodded. "Then we don't let them know." "Not yet." They developed a plan. Not to go public immediately, but to be strategic. He would return to the city and connect with a journalist he once trusted, a man who had covered whistleblower stories and understood how to protect sources. Emily would remain off the grid until they were sure it was safe. She couldn't afford to be seen. Not until they knew whether the truth would bring justice or retaliation. Before he left, she gave him one last item, a flash drive. Encrypted, she said. Everything from the tapes. Backup. If something happens to the originals, use this. The goodbye was quiet. No tears. Just understanding. As he stepped away from the cabin, he looked back once. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed against the cold, watching him disappear into the trees. He didn't know how long it would be until he saw her again. But for the first time, he wasn't afraid. Because now he had her voice. Her words. Her proof. And maybe, just maybe, her future. He made it back to the city without incident. Every moment on the road felt fragile, like the evidence might vanish if he drove too fast or braked too hard. He stayed at a hotel under a different name, then called the journalist, someone he hadn't spoken to in years. He simply said, I have a story. It's not mine, but it's real, and it's going to destroy everything you think you know about what they do to kids. The journalist agreed to meet. 1 week later, discreetly. Until then, he waited. Each night, he re-listened to Emily's tapes, letting her voice keep him grounded. He read through the notebook again and again, memorizing names, patterns, routines. She hadn't just left him a message. She had left him a mission. And now, sitting in that dim hotel room with files spread across the floor, he felt a fire begin to grow. A resolve stronger than grief, stronger than fear. Because once the world knew what had happened to Emily, silence would no longer be an option. The journalist arrived exactly on time. Middle-aged, serious, with the cautious eyes of someone who'd seen enough lies to recognize truth by instinct. They sat in a private room at the back of a coffee shop, the blinds drawn, the noise low. The father handed him the folder without a word. As the journalist flipped through the pages, his brows furrowed, jaw tightening with each line he read. He stopped at the photograph, the one with Emily and the wires. He stared at it for a long time. Where did you get this? He asked. My daughter, he said. She was one of them. The journalist didn't respond immediately. He set the photo down with reverence. This is a firestorm, he murmured. If we publish this, it's not just going to be a headline. This is congressional testimony, closed-door investigations, destroyed careers. Maybe worse. The father nodded. Good. That's what it deserves. The journalist looked at him, searching his face for hesitation. He found none. They spent the next 4 hours going over everything. Dates. Locations. The architect. The coded language. The paper trail. The journalist recorded the interview but promised to blur identities, to mask timelines, until Emily gave consent. We'll build this right, he said. No leaks. No early drafts. When this story hits, it'll be ironclad. No one will be able to silence it. The father gave him the flash drive last. Everything's on here. Audio. Transcripts. Maps. All of it. As the journalist left, he paused at the door. You're brave for doing this, he said. The father didn't answer right away. He simply looked down at the empty cup in his hands. I wasn't brave. Not for 19 years. She was. Then he looked up, his voice steady. I'm just making sure her voice is louder than their silence. That night, as the journalist began his first draft in a locked office across town, Emily's words began to echo through a machine that would carry them far beyond the cabin, far beyond the trees, into the light. Days turned into a week. Then 2. The journalist worked in silence, triple-checking every fact, every line, every cross-reference from Emily's notebook and tapes. He brought in a second researcher, trusted, vetted, who specialized in tracing shell corporations. They followed the funding trails left in Emily's handwritten charts and discovered something explosive. Several current child welfare NGOs were still linked, through layers of redirection, to the same parent entity that once owned Cedar Lake. The name had changed. The language had softened. But the engine underneath was the same. When the journalist finally called, his voice was different, sharper, energized. We found them, he said. They never stopped. They just shifted form. Private research grants, international partnerships, quote-unquote, early behavioral intervention programs. They're still testing, still selecting, and still silencing anyone who digs too deep. The father sat on the edge of the bed in his hotel room, his heart pounding. So it wasn't just Emily, he murmured. It's still happening. Yes, the journalist confirmed. But because of her notes, her voice, we can prove it. You have to understand, this won't just be an article. This is going to start a war. Political, legal, maybe worse. There will be people who try to discredit her. People who try to spin this as conspiracy or fiction. But once we go public, there's no going back. The father closed his eyes. He could still hear Emily's voice on the tapes. Make it mean something. He nodded. Then let's make it count. They chose a date. 1 month from now. Enough time to build an airtight dossier, notify legal teams, and prepare for the storm. The father returned to the cabin to tell Emily everything. When she opened the door, he saw the change in her immediately. Her shoulders straighter, her eyes more alert. She hadn't just been waiting. She'd been preparing. As he explained what the journalist had uncovered, she didn't flinch. Instead, she pulled out a second notebook, one she hadn't shown before. "There's more," she said simply. "I was waiting until I knew you wouldn't run." He sat down as she opened it. Inside were details, names of children she'd seen, dates of adjustments, the backdoor protocol she'd memorized in case she was ever taken again. It wasn't paranoia. It was survival. "They taught us to hide," she said, "to erase ourselves. But I remembered. I always remembered. And now, they don't get to forget." They sat for hours, reviewing every page, preparing for the moment when secrecy would no longer protect them, but truth might finally free others. In the weeks leading to publication, the pressure mounted like a tidal wave held back by wires. Legal threats began to trickle in. Anonymous emails. One of the researchers' computers was hacked. The journalist's editor received an unmarked envelope with photos of his family and a warning. Some stories are better left untold. But no one backed down. The evidence was too strong. The pattern too obvious. The silence too long. And Emily's voice, raw, brave, unforgettable, was now the heart of it all. The article's title was chosen carefully. The Vanishing Room. How a Missing Girl Uncovered a Global Silence. It would be published with audio excerpt from her tapes, scans of the drawings from her notebook, redacted to protect those still hiding. The photo of Emily at 13, wired and weeping, would lead the story. The journalist had offered to pixelate her face. Emily refused. "They made me disappear. Let the world see what they erased." On the eve of publication, the father and daughter sat in the cabin, staring into the fire. She was quiet for a long time, until she finally asked, "Do you think they'll come for us?" He didn't lie. "Maybe. But this time we'll be ready." She nodded slowly. Then, almost hesitantly, she reached under the floorboard where she kept her hidden cash. She pulled out a box and placed it between them. It wasn't the puzzle box from her childhood, but something new. "I made this," she said. "My own version. But this one doesn't hide anything. It opens." Inside were clippings, letters from Mira, a bracelet from one of the other girls, a note in another child's handwriting that said, "Don't forget me." It wasn't just a box. It was a memorial, a message, a promise. She looked at her father. "When the world reads this, I want them to remember all of us. Not just me." He nodded, his throat tight. "They will. Because you never stopped remembering." That night, for the first time since 1994, she slept without keeping one eye on the door. And miles away, in a newsroom lined with servers and silence, a story was queued to publish at dawn. The countdown had begun, and with it, the silence that had protected monsters for decades was about to be shattered. At exactly 6 o'clock the next morning, the article went live. Within minutes, it was everywhere. The image of 13-year-old Emily, wires taped to her head, eyes defiant through tears, flashed across screens, headlines, and breaking news alerts around the world. The story exploded like wildfire. Social media erupted. Survivors from other facilities came forward. Anonymous testimonies poured into the journalist's encrypted inbox. People who had been afraid to speak until now. Some confirmed details from Emily's tapes. Others added horrors even she hadn't witnessed. News outlets scrambled to verify the information. Within hours, major networks were broadcasting live segments. Senators issued statements of concern. An emergency panel was formed to investigate the alleged practices in historical child behavior programs. But Emily's father watched it all unfold, not from a podium, not from a newsroom, but from the safety of the cabin, where the truth had first been whispered into the dark. Emily didn't watch it first. She stayed near the fire, flipping slowly through the second notebook, the one filled with names. But when her father showed her the first televised interview, of a woman now in her 40s who recognized the D-level wing from Emily's map. Her expression changed. The woman was shaking. Her voice broke on camera. "I saw that girl. I remember her face. I remember what they did to her. She tried to help us. They called her Subject 94. Emily's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She simply whispered, "She remembered me." It wasn't just validation. It was proof that Emily's story had not only survived, it had connected, that she hadn't disappeared in vain, that every coded message, every sketch, every whisper in the dark had become a beacon someone else could follow. For the first time, the weight she carried wasn't hers alone. And that was the beginning of something neither of them could have predicted: hope. Over the next 72 hours, the fallout intensified. Whistleblowers leaked internal memos. Archived documents surfaced showing connections between Cedar Lake and international foundations claiming to fund educational reform. A list of former directors, many still in positions of power, was made public. One had been advising a foreign government. Another had just been appointed to a child welfare board. Suddenly, the silence Emily had fought against was cracking wide open, and powerful people were scrambling. In private, behind the scenes, they pushed back. Legal threats, attempts to discredit the journalist, old-school records altered, fake witness testimonies planted online. But the truth had already grown roots. Every time someone tried to bury it, more evidence surfaced, because Emily hadn't been the only one keeping records. Others, once scattered and silenced, were now finding each other. The journalist's investigation evolved into a network, and that network became a movement. They called it the Unforgotten. A campaign began to locate other survivors and offer them protection, therapy, and, when they were ready, a voice. A foundation was created in Emily's name, not to retell her pain, but to empower others to break their silence. Her story, once hidden in a puzzle box, now lived on in classrooms, courtrooms, and hearts across the globe. And yet, in the cabin, none of it changed Emily's quiet demeanor. She still moved carefully, still kept her back to the wall when standing near a window. Trauma didn't vanish with justice. It lingered. But what had changed was this. She laughed sometimes now. She walked with her head higher. She started drawing again. Not maps, not codes, but birds. Whole skies full of them. One evening, as the sun fell behind the trees, she handed her father a sketch. A single bird in mid-flight. Below it, a note. For the first time, "I'm not flying away. I'm flying forward." And in that moment, he understood. This wasn't a story about a girl who vanished. It was a story about a girl who refused to be erased. By the second week, the ripple effects of the article had turned into a wave. International media picked up the story. Human rights organizations launched their own parallel investigations. Independent journalists unearthed similar retreat-style facilities across South America, Eastern Europe, and Asia. Names from Emily's notebooks matched registration records from foreign programs. Suddenly, it was no longer a national scandal. It was a global reckoning. And at the center of it all stood a girl who had once been voiceless. Now, her words were on every headline. Despite the chaos outside, the cabin remained untouched, sacred ground, where Emily could still be Emily. But her father noticed a change in her. Where once her voice had been careful, precise, now it carried something else: conviction. She began writing again, this time not in code, but in clarity. She drafted letters to families of the other children she remembered. Some of those children had never been found. Some had been listed as runaways. Some, presumed dead. They deserved to be known, she said softly. Even if the world forgot them, I didn't. One night, as the fire crackled low, she shared something she hadn't before. There was a file, she said, her eyes distant. On me. They called it the deviant thread. I think I scared them because I didn't break. She paused. But I wasn't brave. I was just stubborn. I didn't want them to know my name. Her father looked at her with quiet pride. You didn't just keep your name, he said. You gave it power. Days later, a letter arrived at the journalist's office. No return address. Inside was a printed copy of the original deviant thread file, ripped from the Cedar Lake archive. Along with it, a note typed in bold, clinical font. She was never supposed to survive. If you're reading this, she already won. The journalist sent it to Emily, who read it once, and folded it without reaction. Then they finally understand, she said. She didn't celebrate. She didn't rage. She just sat by the window, letting sunlight spill across her face, like someone who had earned every ray of peace. The cabin began receiving mail, not threats, not warnings, but letters. Handwritten notes from strangers, survivors, parents, teachers. Thank you for surviving, one read. Another said, because of you, my sister finally told us what happened. Emily read them all, often in silence, sometimes with a trembling hand. She kept each one in a carved wooden box she labeled voices. It was the only box she never locked. The father watched as Emily slowly allowed the world to touch her again. She still refused interviews, still refused to appear on camera, but her presence was felt everywhere. Quotes from her tapes became part of advocacy campaigns. A documentary was produced using only her voice and animations from her drawings. The world didn't need to see her face to believe her. Her words had already carved a place in history. Then came the subpoena. A grand jury investigation had been launched into the surviving board members of the Cedar Lake Project. One of the key pieces of evidence, Emily's tapes. She was requested to testify, anonymously, if she chose. At first, she froze. The thought of facing a courtroom, even from behind a screen, brought back the cold silence of D-level. They'll twist my words, she said. They'll make it about my memory, not their crimes. Her father took her hand. They won't. Because you're not a victim anymore. You're a witness. And the truth needs you. She didn't answer immediately. That night, she went outside and stood beneath the stars, barefoot in the grass, the wind weaving through her hair. When she came back in, she said just one thing. I'll do it, but not as Subject 94. As Emily Wren. The following week, she gave her statement. Private, sealed, uncompromising, and somewhere in a government archive, her voice was now filed not as a number, but as a name, a truth, a reckoning. News of Emily's testimony sparked another wave, this time within the legal system. Judges began re-examining past cases involving children who had gone missing near similar programs. Attorneys who had once dismissed families as hysterical or misguided were now being questioned under oath. What had once been seen as tragic disappearances were now, in many cases, being reframed as forced erasures. Children stolen not just from their homes, but from their identities. Emily, however, remained out of the spotlight. She refused all press. She didn't want fame, only justice. In the cabin, she kept track of the headlines with quiet detachment, circling the names of other survivors who had begun to speak publicly. Each one is like a bell, she said once, tapping the edge of the newspaper. And together, they're making noise no one can ignore. But not everyone celebrated. Shortly after her sealed testimony, someone left a dead bird nailed to the door of the journalist's apartment. A message. Crude. Old tactics from an old enemy. The journalist didn't flinch. He reported it, changed his locks, and doubled his digital security. They can't silence this anymore, he told her father over the phone. They waited too long. The world has changed. Still, Emily's father worried. Not just for her safety, but for her soul. Trauma doesn't follow timelines. It lurks, waits, creeps in during the quiet. Some nights, he still saw her sit awake long past midnight, staring at the coals in the fireplace, as if waiting for the shadows to shift. When he asked what she was thinking, she said, sometimes I wonder how many of us didn't make it. How many stories ended without even a whisper. To honor them, she began a new notebook, this one with no codes, no hidden meanings. At the top of the first page, she wrote, for those who were never found. Each day, she added a name. Some she remembered from Cedar Lake. Others were pulled from news clippings and archives. Beside each name, she drew a small flame, a quiet promise that they, too, would be remembered. And in doing so, Emily Wren transformed from a lost girl in a missing persons case into a historian of the forgotten. Spring brought more than new growth to the woods. It brought accountability. The grand jury's findings were damning. Arrests were issued. 2 former Cedar Lake executives fled the country, sparking international warrants. A high-ranking medical official who had overseen psychological compliance trials was taken into custody. His official defense? That the children were willing participants in developmental studies. But when Emily's voice played in the courtroom, taped and firm, with the clarity only survival can grant, the lie crumbled. Public reaction was swift and furious. Protests erupted in front of government buildings. Parents of still missing children demanded audits of similar programs. Documentaries were translated into multiple languages. Victim advocacy groups offered support hotlines that were immediately overwhelmed. Emily's testimony had opened a wound the world didn't know it carried. But not everyone in power was pleased. A federal agency quietly reached out, asking to debrief Emily in a private setting. They claimed it was for her protection. The journalist advised against it. They don't want her insight, he said bluntly. They want control over her narrative. The father agreed. Emily declined the request without hesitation. They kept me silent for 19 years, she said. They don't get another minute. Instead, she focused on the Voices box, now overflowing with letters, stories, artwork. Survivors from all over the world began sending her their truths. Some included childhood photos. Others sent dried flowers, folded stars, symbolic tokens of solidarity. Her drawings changed too. No longer just birds. Now flocks, groups in flight. No longer alone. No longer hiding. And one night, while placing another name into the memorial notebook, she smiled for the first time in front of her father. A small smile. Quiet. Earned. I used to think my life ended in 1994, she said. But now I think maybe it started the moment I said it out loud. He didn't reply. He just reached across the table and held her hand. Because sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that don't need to end. By early summer, what began as a single article had evolved into a movement with global reach. Universities opened symposiums on institutional abuse. Government panels proposed legislation to prevent state-funded psychological experiments on minors. And most remarkably, a coalition of former survivors gathered in Geneva to draft an international declaration called the Wren Accord. Its mission was simple. No child should ever vanish without someone demanding to know why. Though Emily didn't attend, her presence was felt in every speech, every signature, every camera lens trained on that moment. Her voice, once confined to dusty tapes and a puzzle box, had become the catalyst for a shift in how the world protected its most vulnerable. Still, she remained in the cabin, grounded, quiet. This movement isn't about me, she said once to her father. It's about what they tried to bury, and what wouldn't stay buried. More survivors reached out. One man, now in his 50s, sent a video message. He hadn't spoken in public since his own adjustment in 1978. In the recording, he held up a note. Because of you, I remember my name. Emily watched the clip in silence, then whispered, then it was worth it. For someone who had lived so long in the shadows, she was now the lantern for countless others who'd never dared to speak. Not all the stories were full of resolution. Some were messy. Some spoke of loved ones lost to suicide, of children who had vanished in mental institutions, never to return. Emily read every single one. She never turned away from the pain. They deserve that, she said. They didn't choose to be erased. Her notebook filled faster now. Every page a tribute. Every flame beside a name, a soft rebellion against forgetting. One day, her father brought her an envelope. Hand-delivered, no return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper, a court document. Her name, Emily Wren, had officially been removed from the National Database of Missing Persons. Her case, once marked unsolved, now read, found, alive. Beneath that, one final note in pen, we see you. She read it, then folded it carefully and placed it in her Voices box. For the first time, her name no longer belonged to a headline, a file, or a photograph. It belonged to her. On the anniversary of her disappearance, June 22nd, 19 years to the day, Emily stood barefoot at the edge of the woods behind the cabin. The morning light bled softly through the trees. Her father stood beside her, holding a bundle of the letters she had received from other survivors. Without a word, they began pinning them to a long piece of twine stretched between two trees. Paper fluttered gently in the breeze, each one like a voice in the wind. Dozens of them, dozens of stories, names, memories, questions that had finally found space to be asked. They called it the line of the lost. That day, a small group gathered silently, people she had invited in secret. Not cameras, not politicians, just survivors. They walked the path to the cabin quietly, reverently. One woman clutched a teddy bear. Another held a dog tag engraved with a child's name. Some had never spoken out before. But Emily stood at the end of the path with open hands. No fear in her eyes, only recognition. Only home. Together, they stood in a circle beneath the tall trees. No speeches, no press, only the wind, and the rustle of paper, and the beating of hearts that had once been silent. And then, from her coat, Emily pulled out the original puzzle box, the one she hadn't touched since the day her father opened it. She placed it on a tree stump, opened the lid, and inside were two items, the photo of her at 13 and a small slip of paper. She turned it outward so everyone could see. It read, "We survived." Then she lit a single match, dropped it inside, and stepped back. The fire rose slowly, consuming the past not with vengeance, but with clarity. The box cracked, curled, and then turned to ash. And from that ash, Emily Wren stepped forward. Not as a missing person, not as a victim, not even as a symbol, but as a girl who had once vanished and chose to return, to be heard, to be counted, to be unforgotten. What began as the story of a missing girl in the summer of 1994 transformed into something far deeper, a testimony of human resilience, a battle against silence, and the unstoppable force of a voice that refused to be erased. Emily Wren didn't just survive. She documented, she remembered, and she turned every scar into evidence. In a world that tried to forget her, she left proof in plain sight, one puzzle piece at a time. And when the world finally looked, really looked, it saw not just her pain, but her power. Her journey reminds us that survival isn't always loud. Sometimes it's silent. It's choosing to write your name one more time when someone tells you to forget it. It's whispering the truth in empty rooms, hoping one day someone listens. It's building your own puzzle box, not to hide, but to protect what matters most. Emily's courage doesn't just belong to her. It belongs to every person who has ever been made to feel invisible and still found a way to be seen. This story forces us to ask the uncomfortable questions. How many truths are buried beneath bureaucracy and silence? How many children were erased, not by time, but by systems designed to consume them? And what happens when one voice, just one, decides not to disappear? The answer is in the headlines, the testimonies, and the quiet revolutions sparked by Emily's name. Not as a case file, not as a victim, but as a mirror, reflecting how far we still have to go, and how much farther we've come because of her. If there's one thing to take from her journey, let it be this: truth has gravity. It doesn't vanish. It waits. And the moment we are brave enough to face it, it moves. It shifts power, changes laws, heals wounds, and gives back names to those who were stripped of them. Emily's story is not a relic of the past. It is a call to attention in the present, a signal for us to stay awake, to ask more, and to never again be satisfied with easy answers. If this story moved you, if it opened your eyes, or made you feel something you weren't expecting, don't let it end here. Share your thoughts below. Let your voice join the others. Subscribe to the channel so we can keep telling the stories that deserve to be remembered. And if you believe, like we do, that no one should ever be forgotten, then like this video and help carry this truth forward. Because some stories are too important to vanish.